Ladies and gentlemen, we continue with this session, and may I invite Dr. Samir Srivastava. He is Director of the Non-Invasive Cardiology Department at the Fortis Escorts Heart Institute and Research Center in New Delhi. Dr. Srivastava, for the next 11 minutes, would deliberate on mitral regurgitation, when and how to intervene. Dr. Srivastava, please.
Good afternoon to you all, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. Mitral regurgitation, the philosophy and the talk is what Dr. Kasliwal has left us with. Basically, echo is an essential tool for establishing etiology and hemodynamic consequences of mitral regurgitation. Transthoracic echo is most of the times enough. And in transthoracic echo, what we can make out is the valvular structure, impact of volume overload. Transesophageal echo is needed for clarification of several things. In fact, it is mandatory whenever you are planning for a mitral valve repair. Duration and severity of regurgitation are important determinants of adaptive changes, which can be again assessed by a transthoracic echo. Cardiac chamber remodeling is not specific for degree of regurgitation, but still it matters whenever you are choosing the size of the valve and for assessing the prognosis. This is what the anatomy of mitral valve is. There is an anterior leaflet, there is a posterior leaflet, and both of them are labeled from lateral to medial as A1, A2, A3 or P1, P2, P3 from lateral to medial. Better defined are the posterior scallops, anterior scallops are lesser defined, and the components of the mitral valve include, it is not only the leaflets, it is left atrial wall, mitral annulus, anterior and posterior leaflets, chordae, papillary muscle, left ventricular myocardium underlying the papillary muscle, and abnormalities of any of these can lead to mitral regurgitation. This is mitral valve anatomy whenever you are doing a transesophageal echo views. I am going to make very dogmatic and very strong statements. Severe mitral regurgitation seldom occurs with normal mitral anatomy. If you are making a diagnosis of mitral regurgitation, most of the times there has to be some structural abnormality. Now, there are two types of mitral regurgitation, and distinction has to be made because a lot of treatment modalities are dependent whether it's a primary MR or a secondary MR. Primary MR is essentially due to abnormal mitral valve apparatus. However, secondary is due to LV dilatation and dysfunction, secondary to ischemia. It is kind of a misnomer. It is not ischemic mitral regurgitation, it is probably infarct mitral regurgitation. But for some reason it has been called as ischemic mitral regurgitation, so we will continue using that nomenclature. Now, ischemic mitral regurgitation, I will just spend a couple of minutes because it's gaining more and more importance because a lot of debate is happening what to do of ischemic mitral regurgitation. It can happen because of annular dilatation or it can happen because of the remodeling of the subvalvular apparatus. Okay, we will start from where we left. I am going to give you a few examples and how to calculate mitral regurgitation, and then we will take up our discussion from there on. The most comfortable way to find out mitral regurgitation is eyeballing and look at the jet area. But what you need to have is a color flow imaging with adequate color gains, Nyquist limits of about 50 to 60 and color gains that eliminates random speckled. Jet area between 4 to 8 is moderate, anything lesser than 4 is mild, more than 8 is severe. And examples of these sorts are rare to find. This is severe mitral regurgitation, though it's an eccentric MR. But all the same, you can make out that there is a spontaneous PISA here at the start of with the Nyquist limits of 50 to 60, if there is a spontaneous PISA, that means you are looking at a severe mitral regurgitation regardless. Again, an example of a severe mitral regurgitation with a spontaneous PISA, the jets are going almost into the pulmonary veins and to the L appendage. So we are looking at a severe mitral regurgitation. Do not rely on single frame measurements because the duration of MR is extremely important. In mitral valve prolapse, say, a late systolic MR may lead to overestimation of MR severity by techniques that rely on single frame measurements. So it has to be pan-systolic. If you see pan-systolic mitral regurgitation, that is the time when you should be comfortable that you are dealing with a significant mitral regurgitation. This is how you grade MR. If this is area to left atrial area versus jet area, if the ratio is less than 20%, you are looking at a grade 1, 20 to 40% is grade 2, and grade 3 is more than 40%. This is how you take the measurements. You have to take the area of the L very importantly, and important thing is that the tenting area should be not included whenever you're taking the area of the left atrium. This is an example where the jet, normally what we do in color coding is blue away and red towards. But here, several times you will find that the red can also be a part of the severe mitral regurgitation. Reason being that the jet comes and starts swirling around, and the moment it starts swirling around, it seems as if the jet is going towards the transducer, and it is a fallacious thing. So this is a severe mitral regurgitation. Here is an example of that. If you see both blue and red in the same frame, that means it is the same mitral regurgitation which is swirled across in the LA. This is what I mean when I say that here it is a regurgitation jet, swirls, goes back, and gives you a blue code and a red code. Now, I'm going to run through the slides because several times eyeballing and jet area is not enough. You have to look at the mechanism of the MR. You have to look at the vena contracta. If there is one single parameter, which is the most robust parameters to great severity of mitral regurgitation, it is vena contracta. Remember 0.3 to 0.6, anything lesser than 0.3 is mild, greater than 0.7 is severe mitral regurgitation. This is the narrowest portion at the start of the jet of mitral regurgitation, and this is the place where you take the vena contracta. So 0.3 to 0.7 is, 0.6 is moderate, and beyond that is severe. PISA is research oriented. It is, I'll give you an example of PISA. It's rainy days these days. If you go to the terrace, you will find that there is a hole drain from where the water is pouring all through into it. So when the water approaches towards the drain, it starts causing hemispheres. These hemispheres are flow dependent and they have a certain velocity. You compute them and you get a mitral valve area. There are several limitations of PISA, and the biggest problem is that PISA is dependent upon not a sphere, it is a smiley faced regurgitation jet which is opening, orifice area is smiley, and that's one of the major limitations of PISA. You have quantitative parameters where you calculate the volumes, you can calculate the effective orifice areas, you can calculate the regurgitant fractions, and these are all which can be done using Doppler techniques. You have to define whether it is repair or replacement. Current thinking is that whatever valves can be repaired should be repaired. Unless it's a desperate need to replace them, please repair them. And important is that you have to find out what is the mechanism. Here is what I was hunting for. This is these are the ischemic MRs which can be repaired. These are the two ones. One is the annular dilatation type 1, and this is the restricted leaflet type 2B. And these are the things. This is a cartoon which will tell you how functional ischemic MR happens. There's a place where you get a myocardial infarction. The moment you get a myocardial infarction, there is a LV which keeps ballooning up. This ballooned up LV leads to mitral annular dilatation. The papillary muscles keep stretched up, and there is a mitral valve tenting leading to functional ischemic MR. These are the ones which, if need be, importance is if need be. There is a big debate whether ischemic MRs should be treated or not treated, because people do not die of mitral regurgitation. They die of increased left ventricular and diastolic pressure, for which you do nothing in case you change the valve or you even repair the valve. So it's a big debate whether ischemic MR should be tackled or not. Certainly not in poor LVs. If the ejection fraction is greater than 35% and 40%, you feel that there is some viability left. Along with CAVG, you want to do something to it. That is the time when you should repair, not. Dr. Kaslia will be remembering, this is a study which we started in Escorts Heart Institute, where what we did was, there was a device called the Coapsis device. And this is a very interesting device. What you do in this device is that it's a telephone type receiver, old telephone receiver kind of a thing, which is a long cord. You keep pulling the cord, and what you do is you keep narrowing the leakage area. So what you are doing is that the coaptation area you are restricting as you pull the cord, and the leakage stops, which can be seen on the table as the lower one shows that there is a leakage when you put water inside or saline inside the LV. Keep turning and twisting, keep pulling the cord, and there is a point of time when it stops. This is the time when you find that the leakage has stopped. Indeed, mitral regurgitation comes down. Absolutely correct. Mitral regurgitation does come down. But what happened to the patients? None of them survived even a day longer. So, Reduction of mitral regurgitation, does it serve to increase survival pattern? Probably not. And that's the reason why ischemic MRs are a very important subset these days, which are in discussion all over the globe. These are the signs of severe mitral regurgitation. Vena contracta width, more than 7. Large central area jet, more than 40% of the area of LA. Large flow convergence, systolic reversal in pulmonary veins, prominent failed mitral valve or ruptured papillary muscles. These are 2D signs. Dense triangular. These are supportive signs, but all the same they are important, because the moment you look that there is a dense triangular continuous wave Doppler, you know that probably you are dealing with a severe mitral regurgitation. If the E waves are tall, there is a short A, E is more than 1.2 meters per second, you know that probably you are looking at a severe mitral regurgitation, and size of the LA and LV are important. 4, 5, 6, that's how you remember the quantitative parameters. 4, 5, 6 is if the regurgitant orifice area is more than 0.4, regurgitant fraction is more than 50%, and regurgitant volume is more than 60 ml. This is Doppler parameters, you can derive them. All commercially available machines have got a specific gating for that. All you have to do is press the button, keep feeding in the numbers, and you will get regurgitant volume, regurgitant fractions, and orifice area. So this is how you calculate severity of MR. Importance is that whenever you are dealing with any mitral regurgitation, please look at the area of non-coaptation. If you look at this, there is an area of non-coaptation. But here in this case, we were foxed, because should I get down?
You continue. You continue, Samir.
Okay. So this is the area which didn't show that there was a severe mitral regurgitation. So that is the time when you have to keep hunting, twist your probes, keep hunting for severity, and eventually you'll find that there is some telltale sign that you are dealing with. Here there is a regurgitant jet. So you have to trace the origin of this, and once you start tracing it, you'll find that probably you have missed something. So important is look at the telltale signs, look at the 2D, and then decide what are the treatment options. Essentially, I'm running against time, so I'll just summarize. Essentially, the options are medical, surgery, and now MitraClip or intervention. Unfortunately, we don't have long-term or survival hardcore points for MitraClips. It is a hype. Again, we'll have to see that what are the quality of life changes and what are the survival pattern changes with MitraClip, which is a clip which is percutaneously used. Surgery is most amenable, and most of the surgeons in sensible centers are shifting from replacement to repairs, which is something which is good, because repairs have given good quality of life, and the survival is as good as what replacement used to be, in fact better. And medical options are limited in case the patients can be done well and they don't fall into the criteria of severe mitral regurgitation or mitral regurgitation which are symptomatic. Thank you very much for a patient listening.
Samir, that was very nice, because I know it's a very long topic and you had to really rush through it, but you were very lucid, and it was good you showed us so many, because you're such an experienced echocardiographist. You showed us so many echo plates also. Any questions from the audience? Would you like a minute again now, how to intervene? I think you didn't have time for that. So you told us that we must always prefer repair over whenever possible.
Correct.
What are the situations where repair is not possible, we should go in for replacement?
Okay. Quickly, posterior mitral leaflet regurgitations are very good for repairs. Anterior mitral leaflet regurgitations, which is basically prolapse, are difficult because anterior mitral leaflet scallops are not very well defined as against P2 posterior mitral leaflet. So anterior mitral leaflets, in case the surgeon is a very good surgeon, is a confident surgeon, for anterior mitral leaflet prolapses, please prefer replacements. Number 2, rheumatic degenerated repairs are difficult. That is one subset where, in case you find that there is a child where you cannot do a OMC, or you can't, not OMC, but you can't do a very good commissurotomy and put in a ring, so leakages can be better. Better is to go for a replacement. So these are two basic subsets where balance always tilts towards replacement rather than repair in these two subsets.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let us give me a big hand for a very
Thank
good
you,
presentation. Thank you.
Dr. Srivastava. Ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the next segment, that's rheumatic
Yes,
heart
yes.
disease.
Yeah, I just want to ask you one question. Like you said, repair is better now. All of the concerned people, they know repair is better. But now there are very good biological valves coming up in the market. So repair is anyway, it is a long, steep learning curve. And even with the biological valve, pericardial valve, or maybe better valve substitute, they can last for almost 10 to 15 years. And more so, repair will also last for 10 to 15 years. But replacement has got a very small learning curve, and anybody can, even resident can do it. And repair will require a lot of experience. So in your experience, what would be the take-home message? So whether to replace valve with a biological valve or whether to try and do repair?
Repair. I'll tell you the reason why. What happens is that whenever you are replacing a valve, most of the times, excuse me, if you want to give a nice big size valve, you have to cut the anterior and the posterior mitral valve apparatus. You can. Posterior is easily preservable, anterior cannot be preserved several times. Either you give a small valve. If you have to give a big valve, you have to let go the chordae and the anteromitral and posterior mitral apparatus. This is the problem. The problem is not how the valve will survive. In fact, the best survival is for metal valves. Each metal valve, so they claim, bileaflet St. Jude's valve, is tested for 300 years. Issue is not survival of the valve, it is how the LV remodels. The moment you cut the chordae, the moment you take out the anterior and the posterior mitral apparatus, LV starts to dilate. And this LV dilatation over a period of long term is the killer. So best is to repair if you can. If you cannot, then, well, then the choice and the debate starts. Whether to give a tissue valve, whether to give a metallic valve. If there is a girl who's to get pregnant, certainly you must give her a tissue valve. If there is somebody who's beyond 50 years of age or 55 years, certainly tissue valves are to be considered. In between, give a choice. Now here the issue is very interesting. Today, we are in an era where everything is getting converted percutaneous. I'll give an example of aortic valve replacement. Today, if there is somebody at the age of 25 years, boy, I'll give him both the choices of a tissue valve and a metal valve. Why? Though metal valves are strongly indicated, class 1 indication is metal valve. But for a 25 years old boy who is undergoing aortic valve replacement, I'll give him a choice of tissue valve as well. Because even if this tissue valve degenerates at the end of 15 years, by the time I can foresee the future of technology, TAVR will become a valid situation for her. So why unnecessarily give him or deny him a chance of percutaneous valve then, and give him the risk of a 25 years old boy? He wants to go mountaineering, he wants to go biking, and we know the side effects and the problems. 1 to 3% thromboembolic rates per annum with anticoagulations, oral anticoagulants. So this is a very debatable issue, but all the same, if there is a choice between repair and replacement, if it can be repaired, certainly repair.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Srivastava.